Imagine a woman sits in a hospital bed, cradling her 3-day-old daughter, waiting for her husband to come take them home. She's exhausted, overwhelmed, but happy, because after everything they've been through together, they're finally a family. She keeps checking her phone. No messages. No missed calls. Then the nurse walks in with a manila envelope. Inside, divorce papers and a handwritten note that will haunt her forever. I can't do this anymore. I found someone who makes me happy. Don't contact me. That's it. 23 years of marriage, reduced to 2 sentences. No explanation. No goodbye kiss for his newborn daughter. Just gone. This is the story of Keisha Williams, a woman who sacrificed everything for a man who threw her away like yesterday's newspaper. But what happened next will shock you, because sometimes the universe has a way of serving justice when you least expect it, and in ways more devastating than any revenge you could ever plan. This video took us over 8 hours of writing, research, and production to bring to you. Please subscribe. It helps us keep going. And if you want the deeper stories we can't post here, join our subscribers-only circle. Let me take you back to where it all began, because Keisha's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about a woman who built a man's empire with her own bare hands, only to watch him hand it over to someone else. 23 years earlier, Keisha met Marcus Williams at Howard University. He was studying business. She was majoring in environmental science, and they were both broke college students sharing ramen noodles and big dreams. Marcus had this vision, luxury eco-resorts that would revolutionize Caribbean tourism. The problem? He had the ambition, but none of the knowledge. That's where Keisha came in. While Marcus focused on the business side, Keisha became the brain behind the entire operation. She spent countless nights researching sustainable building materials, learning about coral reef protection, studying renewable energy systems. She designed every aspect of what would become Marcus's resort empire, from the solar panel layouts to the water recycling systems that would make their properties completely self-sufficient. But here's what makes this story even more heartbreaking. Keisha didn't just contribute her knowledge. She contributed everything. When Marcus needed startup capital, she cashed out her grandmother's inheritance. $50,000 that was meant to buy her own home someday. When he needed credibility with environmental groups, she used her connections from graduate school. When he needed someone to work 18-hour days without pay, she did it with a smile, believing they were building something together. For over 2 decades, Keisha was the invisible force behind Marcus Williams Resorts. While he traveled the world, schmoozing investors and cutting ribbons, she was back home, managing construction projects, negotiated with environmental agencies, and solving every crisis that threatened to derail their empire. The press called Marcus a visionary. Environmental magazines featured him on their covers. He won awards for sustainable tourism. But nobody knew that every innovation, every green technology, every award-winning design came from his wife's brilliant mind. And through it all, Keisha never asked for recognition. She never demanded her name on the business documents. She never insisted on equal credit. Why? Because she loved him. Because she believed in their partnership. Because she thought they were building a legacy together. That's what makes what happened next so absolutely devastating. It started with small changes. Marcus began taking longer business trips. He started working late more often, claiming new investors needed constant attention. He became distant, distracted, always on his phone. When Keisha tried to discuss business decisions, he'd brush her off, saying she wouldn't understand complexities of international finance. This was the same woman who had designed every resort in his portfolio, who had negotiated million-dollar environmental permits, who had saved his company from bankruptcy 3 times. But suddenly, she wouldn't understand. Then came the lies. Marcus told Keisha he was expanding into new markets, which required him to spend months at a time in different countries. What he didn't tell her was that he was spending those months with Sofia Rodriguez, a 28-year-old former model, who had approached him about partnering on a resort in Costa Rica. Sofia was everything Keisha wasn't at that stage in her life. Where Keisha was 45, exhausted from decades of building someone else's dream, Sofia was young, energetic, and completely unburdened by the weight of responsibility. Where Keisha dressed practically for construction sites and environmental surveys, Sofia looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Where Keisha spoke about sustainability and long-term planning, Sofia whispered about passion and living in the moment. For Marcus, who had spent 23 years taking his wife's brilliance for granted, Sofia felt like a revelation. He convinced himself he deserved this happiness. He convinced himself that Keisha would be fine without him. After all, she was strong, capable, independent. He convinced himself that leaving her was actually doing her a favor, freeing her to find someone who would appreciate her. What he really convinced himself was that he could rewrite history, that he could take everything Keisha had built and start fresh with someone new, someone who would worship him the way he felt he deserved. The final betrayal came when Keisha got pregnant at 45. They hadn't planned it, but she was overjoyed. After years of focusing on business, she thought this baby would bring them closer together, would remind Marcus of what really mattered. She imagined teaching their child about protecting the environment, maybe even bringing him into the family business someday. Marcus's reaction should have been her first warning. He was polite but distant, going through the motions of preparing for fatherhood without any real enthusiasm. He attended exactly 2 prenatal appointments, always checking his phone, always having somewhere else to be. But Keisha, ever the optimist, thought the baby's arrival would change everything. She thought once he held his daughter, once he saw the family they created together, he'd remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Instead, he waited until she was at her most vulnerable moment, 3 days postpartum, exhausted, hormonal, completely dependent on him, to destroy her world. Those divorce papers weren't just a legal document. They were a declaration that 23 years meant nothing, that all her sacrifices, all her contributions, all her love had been worthless, that she was disposable. But the cruelest part? Marcus had already started the process of removing her from everything they'd built together. While she was in the hospital giving birth to his child, he was meeting with lawyers, restructuring the business to minimize her claim to assets she'd helped create. He'd transferred key properties into offshore accounts. He'd convinced their business partners that Keisha was no longer involved in operations. He'd even started spreading rumors that their marriage had been troubled for years, that the split was mutual, that she was getting a generous settlement to start fresh. None of it was true, but Marcus had learned one thing from his years of building an empire: control the narrative, and you control everything else. When Keisha finally made it home from the hospital with baby Amara, she found locks changed, credit cards canceled, and bank accounts emptied. The house they'd lived in for 15 years, the house she designed and decorated, where she'd planned to raise their daughter, was no longer hers. Marcus had moved fast and ruthlessly, leaving her with nothing but a 3-day-old baby and a future that felt impossible to imagine. That's when the real nightmare began. Have you ever tried to find an apartment when you have no credit, no income, and a newborn baby? Have you ever tried to explain to a landlord why your husband of 23 years suddenly decided you were worth nothing? Have you ever felt the humiliation of calling friends and family, begging for help, while pretending everything is fine because you're too proud to admit how completely you've been destroyed? Keisha's first month as a single mother was a masterclass in survival. She moved into a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood she'd never considered before, not because she was being picky, but because it was all she could afford with a small amount of cash she'd managed to scrape together from hidden emergency funds Marcus hadn't known about. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building with no elevator. Every day, she had to carry Amara, a stroller, diaper bags, and groceries up 4 flights of stairs. The walls were thin, the heat barely worked, and the neighbors played music until 3 in the morning. It was the kind of place she used to drive past and feel grateful she didn't live there. Now she was grateful just to have a roof over her head. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Amara cried constantly. Colic, the doctor said, though Keisha suspected her daughter was simply responding to the stress radiating from her mother. Keisha would walk the cramped apartment at 2 in the morning, bouncing her screaming baby. Try not to think about the master bedroom in her old house, where Marcus was probably sleeping peacefully next to his young girlfriend. Money disappeared faster than she could have imagined. Diapers, formula, doctor visits, basic groceries. Everything cost more than she remembered. She applied for every job she could find. But who wants to hire someone who hasn't worked outside the home in 20 years? Who wants to hire someone whose only references are ex-husband's business associates, who've been told she's difficult and unstable? She'd built environmental systems for million-dollar resorts, but apparently that didn't qualify her to answer phones at a local engineering firm. The rejection letters piled up. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to go with another candidate. While your background is impressive, we're looking for someone with more recent experience. We'll keep your resume on file, which everyone knows is corporate speak for never going to happen. Meanwhile, Marcus was thriving. Keisha saw the photos on social media before she finally blocked him. Marcus and Sophia at charity galas, Marcus and Sophia at resort openings, Marcus and Sophia living the life that Keisha had made possible. In every photo, he looked younger, happier, more successful than ever. The business magazine started featuring him again. Sustainable tourism pioneer expands empire, and Marcus Williams, the man behind paradise. Each article painted him as a self-made visionary who had single-handedly revolutionized ecotourism in the Caribbean. Not one mentioned his ex-wife. Not one acknowledged the woman who had actually designed every innovation they credited to him. It was like Keisha had never existed. But perhaps the cruelest twist was how people treated her now that she was no longer Marcus Williams' wife. The same colleagues who used to seek her advice at industry conferences now looked through her as if she were invisible. The same friends who used to invite them to dinner parties suddenly stopped calling. Even her own family seemed uncomfortable around her, as if failure might be contagious. Her sister Linda summed up the general attitude during one particularly painful conversation. "I just don't understand how you let this happen, Keisha. You had everything, a successful husband, a beautiful home, financial security. And now look at you. Maybe if you hadn't been so focused on the business all the time, maybe if you'd paid more attention to being a wife." The implication was clear. This was somehow her fault. She had worked too hard, cared too much about the wrong things, failed to keep her husband happy. Never mind that her work had made his success possible. Never mind that she'd sacrificed her own dreams to build his empire. Never mind that she'd been a faithful, devoted partner for over 2 decades. The world had already decided Marcus was a victim of troubled marriage, and Keisha was just another bitter ex-wife who couldn't accept that love sometimes dies. But here's what nobody understood, what nobody wanted to see. Keisha wasn't broken by the betrayal. She was broken by the erasure. She could have survived Marcus leaving her for someone younger. She could have survived divorce, even a messy one. What she couldn't survive was watching 23 years of her life disappear as if it had never mattered at all. Late at night, when Amara finally fell asleep, Keisha would sit in that tiny apartment and wonder if she was losing her mind. Had she really contributed as much as she remembered? Had she really been that important to the business? Or had she just been telling herself stories to feel better about being a traditional wife? Then she'd remember the boxes of documents in her storage unit, the only things Marcus hadn't been able to take from her. Environmental impact studies with her name on them, construction plans in her handwriting, email chains where she solved problem after problem that had stumped his expensive consultants. She had proof. She had evidence of everything she'd contributed. But what good did it do her now? Marcus had won. He had the business, the money, the reputation, and the beautiful young girlfriend. He had successfully rewritten their history, turning himself into the hero and her into a footnote. And she had nothing but a crying baby and a future that felt impossible to imagine. But then something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe it was the first stirring of the strength that had always been there, buried under years of putting someone else's dreams first. Keisha was sitting in that cramped apartment at 3 a.m, holding Amara after another sleepless night, when she looked down at her daughter's face and realized something that changed everything. This little girl was going to grow up watching how her mother handled the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Did she want Amara to learn that when someone betrays you, when someone tries to erase your worth, you just accept it? Did she want to teach her daughter that women should be grateful for whatever scraps men decide to throw them? Or did she want to show her that even when the world tries to convince you that you're worthless, even when everyone else accepts the lies, you can still fight for your truth? That night, sitting in that cramped studio apartment with her newborn daughter sleeping in her arms, Keisha Williams made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was done being erased. If you were abandoned with a newborn, would you fight back or walk away? Tell us in the comments. The first sign that Keisha's life was about to change came in the form of an eviction notice. 3 months after Marcus left, she was behind on rent, behind on everything really. She stood in the hallway of that depressing apartment building, holding the legal document that would make her and Amara homeless in 30 days, when a voice behind her said, "Excuse me, are you Keisha Williams?" She turned around to find a man in an expensive suit, tall and distinguished with graying temples and a kind of confident smile that belonged in boardrooms. He looked completely out of place in her rundown building, like a luxury car parked in a junkyard. "I'm Dr. James Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I was hoping we could talk. I think we might be able to help each other." Now, when you're 3 months into the worst period of your life, when you're holding an eviction notice and your baby is crying from hunger, you don't usually get approached by mysterious men in expensive suits offering help. Keisha's first instinct was suspicion. After what Marcus had done, she wasn't exactly trusting strange men who appeared out of nowhere. But Dr. Mitchell had an explanation that made sense, or at least seemed to make sense at the time. "I'm a developer," he said, "specializing in sustainable tourism projects throughout the Caribbean. I've been following your ex-husband's work for years, and I've always suspected there was more to the story than what appeared in the press. Someone with Marcus's background doesn't suddenly become an environmental genius overnight." He paused, letting that sink in. "I did some research, and your name keeps appearing in connection with every major innovation his company has produced. Environmental impact studies, sustainable design patents, renewable energy implementations, all with your signature on the preliminary documents." Keisha's heart started racing. Someone had noticed. Someone had actually looked beyond Marcus's carefully crafted public image and seen her contributions. "What I'm proposing," Dr. Mitchell continued, "is a partnership. I have the capital and connections to develop a new resort project, but I need someone with your expertise to make it truly revolutionary. Not just sustainable, but regenerative. A property that actually improves the local ecosystem while generating significant profits." He handed her a business card. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm just asking you to think about it. Because what your ex-husband did to you, taking credit for your work while leaving you with nothing, that's not just cruel, it's stupid. He threw away the most valuable asset his company had. Do you believe people who show up at your lowest are angels or opportunists?" Keisha wanted to believe Dr. Mitchell was an angel because God knows she needed one. But something about the timing felt too convenient. Still, she took his card, and that night, after putting Amara to bed, she researched everything she could find about James Mitchell. What she discovered was impressive and slightly unsettling. Dr. Mitchell was legitimate, a successful developer with projects throughout the Caribbean and Central America. His resorts were consistently rated among the most environmentally responsible in their regions. He had advanced degrees from prestigious universities and connections throughout the industry. But there was something else, something that nagged at her as she scrolled through articles and business profiles late into the night. Dr. Mitchell seemed to specialize in taking over projects that were in trouble. He had a pattern of approaching companies or individuals during their worst moments, offering partnership or buyouts that seemed generous, but ultimately gave him controlling interests in valuable properties or technologies. Was he rescuing people? Or was he a vulture who fed on others' misfortune? Keisha couldn't decide, but she also couldn't ignore the reality of her situation. The eviction notice was real. Her dwindling savings were real. Her daughter's needs were real. And Dr. Mitchell's offer, whatever his motives, was the only opportunity anyone had presented to her in months. She called him the next day. Their first meeting took place at an upscale restaurant that Keisha couldn't have afforded even when she was married to Marcus. Dr. Mitchell had reserved a private dining room, and he'd arranged for a babysitter to watch Amara during their discussion, a gesture that impressed Keisha despite her lingering suspicions. "Before we talk business," he said, pouring wine that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget, "I need to ask you something. Are you interested in rebuilding your life, or are you interested in revenge?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've seen your work, and I've seen what your ex-husband has done with it. I can offer you a partnership that will make you financially independent and professionally respected. But if what you really want is to destroy Marcus Williams, there are other ways to accomplish that." "I don't want revenge," Keisha said quickly. "I just want to move forward." Dr. Mitchell smiled, but something in his eyes suggested he didn't entirely believe her. "Good, because revenge is a luxury you can't afford right now. Your daughter needs stability, security, and a mother who's focused on the future, not the past." Over the next 2 hours, he outlined his proposal. He wanted to develop a resort in Belize that would be completely carbon neutral, potentially even carbon negative. But more than that, he wanted to create a new model for sustainable tourism that other developers could replicate worldwide. "This isn't just about building another eco-resort," he explained. "This is about proving that environmental responsibility and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. The resort you design could influence an entire industry." The offer was generous, maybe too generous. A 6-figure salary, equity in the project, and complete creative control over the environmental aspects of the development. Plus, he'd pay for her and Amara to relocate to Belize, where they'd have a house on the beach and access to international schools. It sounded like a dream come true. It also sounded too good to be true. But what choice did she have? Accept Dr. Mitchell's offer and risk being taken advantage of again, or stay in that studio apartment until the eviction became reality, and she was living on the streets with a 6-month-old baby. She accepted. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Mitchell was as good as his word. He moved them to Belize, set them up in a beautiful house near the coast, and gave Keisha complete freedom to design what would become the most environmentally advanced resort in Central America. For the first time in years, Keisha felt like herself again. She spent her days studying the local ecosystem, working with marine biologists to ensure the resort would actually benefit the coral reefs rather than damage them. She designed innovative water systems that would purify runoff, solar installations that would generate more power than the resort consumed, and building techniques that would create habitat for local wildlife. It was the work she'd always loved, but now she was getting credit for it. Dr. Mitchell made sure her name was on every document, every patent application, every environmental impact study. When reporters came to cover the project, he insisted they interview Keisha, not him. Dr. Williams is the genius behind this operation, he would tell them. I just provide the funding and get out of her way. Yes, he'd started calling her Dr. Williams, even though she'd never finished her PhD. You've done the work, he said when she protested. You deserve the title. For a woman who had spent 23 years watching someone else take credit for her ideas, this recognition felt intoxicating. Finally, someone appreciated her contributions. Finally, someone saw her value. But late at night, when she was reviewing construction plans or analyzing environmental data, a little voice in the back of her mind kept asking the same question. What was Dr. Mitchell getting out of this arrangement that made it worth treating her so well? She was about to find out in the most dramatic way possible. The confrontation she'd been avoiding finally came 8 months after she'd moved to Belize. Marcus had somehow tracked her down, and he showed up at the resort construction site, without warning, demanding to speak with her. Keisha saw him before he saw her. She was reviewing foundation plans with a construction foreman when she looked up, and there he was, standing at the edge of the work site in his expensive suit and designer sunglasses, looking completely out of place among the construction equipment and muddy ground. Her first instinct was to run. Her second was to hide. But then she remembered what Dr. Mitchell had said about focusing on the future instead of the past, and she decided to face the man who had tried to erase her from existence. Marcus, she said, walking toward with as much dignity as she could manage. What are you doing here? He looked older than she remembered, and there was something in his expression that might have been regret, though it was hard to tell behind those expensive sunglasses. I came to talk, he said, about Amara, about everything. There's nothing to talk about, Keisha replied. You made your choices very clear. I made mistakes, Marcus said, and for a moment, he sounded like the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. I've been thinking about what I did, about what I gave up, and I want to make things right. Make things right? Keisha laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to make things right? You destroyed our marriage, abandoned your daughter, and stole credit for 23 years of my work. How exactly do you plan to make that right? I want to share custody of Amara, he said, and I want to offer you a settlement. A real settlement, not the nothing I left you with before. Why now? Keisha asked. Why after all this time? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Sophia and I, things aren't working out. She's not you, Keisha. She doesn't understand the business like you do. She doesn't understand me like you do. And there it was. Marcus wasn't here because he'd suddenly developed a conscience. He wasn't here because he missed his daughter or regretted the pain he'd caused. He was here because his young girlfriend had turned out to be exactly what she'd appeared to be, a beautiful woman with no interest in building empires, who probably got bored once the novelty of dating an older, successful man wore off. So you want me back, Keisha said. Is that what this is about? I want us to be a family again, Marcus said. I want to fix what I broke. You can't fix what you broke, Keisha replied, and as she said it, she realized it was true. Even if she wanted Marcus back, even if she could forget the betrayal and the abandonment, she could never trust him again. And even if you could, I wouldn't want you to. You don't mean that, Marcus said. We were good together, Keisha. We built something amazing together. No, she said, her voice getting stronger with each word. I built something amazing. You just put your name on it and took all the credit. But you know what the difference is between then and now? Now I know my worth. Now I know I don't need you to validate my contributions or make my work matter. She gestured toward the construction site behind her, where workers were installing the solar panel system she designed. This resort is going to be featured in every major environmental publication in the world, and my name is going to be on every article, every award, every recognition it receives. Not as your wife, not as your partner, but as Dr. Keisha Williams, the woman who revolutionized sustainable resort development. Marcus's face darkened. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you found some white knight who's going to make you a star? Let me tell you something about James Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell has shown me more respect in 8 months than you showed me in 23 years, Keisha interrupted. Whatever you think you know about him, it doesn't change the fact that he saw my value when you were too blind to recognize it. He's using you, Marcus said, just like I did, except he's better at making you feel good about it. At least he's honest about it, Keisha replied. At least he doesn't pretend to love me while he's stealing my ideas and planning to leave me for someone younger. That's when Marcus played his final card, the one he'd been saving for when all else failed. I know about the money laundering, he said quietly. I know about Mitchell's real business. And if you think the FBI doesn't know about it too, you're more naive than I thought. The world seemed to stop. Construction noise faded into the background. Even the tropical heat seemed to disappear as a chill ran down Keisha's spine. What are you talking about? She asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. James Mitchell isn't just a developer, Marcus said. He's a money launderer. All those resort projects, all those international partnerships, they're fronts for washing dirty money from drug cartels and weapons dealers. And now you're part of it, whether you know it or not. You're lying, Keisha said, but even as the words came out her mouth, she felt the certainty drain away. All those nagging doubts she'd pushed aside, all those questions about Dr. Mitchell's generous offer, all those too-good-to-be-true aspects of their partnership suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. I wish I were, Marcus said, because despite everything that's happened between us, I don't want to see you go to prison. I don't want Amara to grow up visiting her mother behind bars. How do you know this? Keisha asked. Marcus hesitated, then pulled off his sunglasses. For the first time in their conversation, she could see his eyes, and what she saw there terrified her more than his accusations about Dr. Mitchell. Fear. Because they approached me too, he said. The FBI. They've been investigating Mitchell for 3 years, and they know he's been using resort developments to launder money from criminal organizations throughout Central and South America. They also know that several of his previous partners are now serving federal prison sentences. That's impossible, Keisha said. I would know. I've seen all the financial documents, all the funding sources. Have you? Marcus asked. Have you really? Or have you seen the documents Mitchell wanted you to see? The truth hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't questioned the funding sources because she'd been so grateful to finally have someone support her work. She hadn't demanded complete financial transparency because she'd been focused on the environmental aspects of the project, not the business side. She'd made the same mistake she'd made with Marcus. She trusted someone who was using her expertise for their own purposes, except this time the consequences could be federal prison. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because the FBI is going to approach you soon, Marcus said. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but soon. And when they do, they're going to offer you a deal. Help them build a case against Mitchell, and they'll give you immunity. Refuse, and you'll go down with him. And you know this how? Marcus looked away, then back at her. Because I've already made my deal. The ground seemed to shift beneath Keisha's feet. What deal? Mitchell approached me 2 years ago, Marcus said, before he found you. He wanted to use my resort chain to launder money, and he offered me a partnership that would have doubled my profits within 5 years. I was tempted. God help me. I was actually tempted. Because of the settlement I gave you, it put a strain on the business that I hadn't anticipated. Keisha stared at him. Even after everything he'd done to her, she was shocked to learn he considered partnering with criminals. But I said no, Marcus continued. And when I said no, Mitchell started looking for other options. That's where he found you. He's been planning this for over a year, Keisha. The timing of his approach, the generous offer, the way he appeared just when you were most desperate. None of it was coincidence. You're saying he targeted me specifically? I'm saying he needed someone with your expertise and your desperation. Someone brilliant enough to design world-class resorts, but vulnerable enough to not ask too many questions about where the money was coming from. The worst part was that it made perfect sense. Dr. Mitchell's offer had been too good to be true, his timing too convenient, his generosity too complete. She'd ignored all the warning signs because she needed so desperately to believe that someone finally valued her contributions. So what happens now? She asked. Now you have to decide, Marcus said. Do you cooperate with the FBI and help them build their case? Or do you try to protect Mitchell and end up going to prison with him? Would you risk your safety to help the FBI bring down your ex or walk away? But before Keisha could answer, Before she could even begin to process what Marcus had told her, a voice behind them said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to talk." They turned to see a woman approaching, mid-30s professional, with a kind of no-nonsense demeanor that screamed federal law enforcement even before she pulled out her badge. "Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez, FBI," she said. "Mrs. Williams, Mr. Williams, we've been monitoring your conversation, and I think it's time we had a more formal discussion." Keisha's mind reeled. The FBI had been watching them. They'd heard everything Marcus had said about Dr. Mitchell, about money laundering, about deals and immunity. But then something else occurred to her, something that made her blood run cold. "Rodriguez," she said slowly. "Any relation to Sophia Rodriguez?" The FBI agent smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Sophia Rodriguez is my sister," she said. "And she's also Agent Sophia Rodriguez, undercover FBI. She's been working Marcus's organization for the past 2 years, gathering evidence of financial crimes and international money laundering." Marcus went white. "That's impossible. Sophia doesn't know anything about the business. She's just a model who has a master's degree in forensic accounting and 8 years of experience with white-collar crime." Agent Rodriguez finished. "My sister is very good at playing the part of a beautiful, naive young woman who's only interested in expensive jewelry and tropical vacations. It's amazing how much information men will share when they think they're impressing someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of international finance." The pieces were falling into place in Keisha's mind, creating a picture so complex and devastating that she could barely process it. "You've been investigating Marcus, too," she said. "For 3 years," Agent Rodriguez confirmed. "Ever since we received information that Marcus Williams Resorts was being used to launder money from drug cartels operating throughout the Caribbean. But I never," Marcus started. "You never directly laundered money," Agent Rodriguez agreed. "But you did accept investments from shell companies controlled by criminal organizations. You did allow your resorts to be used as meeting places for drug dealers and weapon smugglers. And you did design your business structure specifically to avoid reporting requirements that would have alerted federal authorities to these activities." Keisha stared at Marcus. "You were laundering money. This whole time, while I was designing environmental systems and sustainable technologies, you were running a criminal enterprise." "It wasn't like that," Marcus said. "I didn't know. I mean, I suspected some of the investors might not be completely legitimate, but I never asked questions. I never directly participated in anything illegal." "Willful ignorance isn't a defense," Agent Rodriguez said. "But it's also not the worst crime we're investigating. Which brings us to Dr. James Mitchell." She turned to Keisha. "Mrs. Williams, how much do you know about your current employer's financial operations?" "Apparently nothing," Keisha said, the full scope of her situation finally becoming clear. "I've been focusing on the environmental aspects of the resort development. Dr. Mitchell handles all the business and financial matters. Dr. Mitchell is the head of an international money laundering operation that spans 7 countries, involves over $200 million in criminal proceeds," Agent Rodriguez said. "The resort you're designing isn't just environmentally sustainable. It's the perfect cover for washing money from some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere." Keisha felt like she was drowning. For the second time in less than 2 years, everything she thought she knew about her life was collapsing. But this time, the consequences weren't just personal and financial. They were criminal. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "We want your help," Agent Rodriguez said. "Dr. Mitchell trusts you. He's given you access to parts of his operation that we've never been able to penetrate. Construction schedules, financial transfers disguised as equipment purchases, meetings with local officials who are facilitating the money laundering. You've seen it all, even if you didn't realize what you were looking at." "I won't wear a wire," Keisha said immediately. "I won't put myself or my daughter in danger by spying on someone who's apparently connected to drug cartels." "We're not asking you to wear a wire," Agent Rodriguez said. "We're asking you to do exactly what you've been doing. Design the resort, attend the meetings, review the documents. The only difference is that now you'll be documenting everything you see and reporting back to us. And if I refuse?" Agent Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but something in her tone got colder. "Then you'll be charged as a co-conspirator in a federal money laundering investigation. Your daughter will go into foster care while you await trial, and if convicted, you'll spend the next 15 to 20 years in federal prison." The threat hung in the air like a physical weight. Keisha looked at Marcus, hoping to see some sign that this was all an elaborate nightmare, but his face confirmed her worst fears. This was real. The FBI was real. The criminal charges were real. How long do I have to decide? She asked. You've already decided, Agent Rodriguez said. The only question is whether you're going to help us willingly or whether we're going to arrest you and hope you change your mind before your trial. It wasn't really a choice at all. What do you need me to do? Over the next hour, Agent Rodriguez outlined the FBI's plan. Keisha would continue working on the resort project, but now she'd be gathering evidence of Dr. Mitchell's criminal activities. She'd document financial transactions, record conversations when possible, and report on any suspicious activities or meetings. Most importantly, she'd help them identify the final piece of Mitchell's operation: the offshore accounts where the laundered money was being deposited and the criminal organizations that were funding the resort development. We know the money is coming from drug cartels in Colombia and weapons dealers in El Salvador, Agent Rodriguez explained. What we don't know is exactly how Mitchell is moving the money through the resort project and where it ends up. That's where you come in. And in exchange, complete immunity from prosecution, witness protection if necessary, and a financial settlement that will ensure you and your daughter are taken care of for life. It should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like stepping into another kind of prison. As Agent Rodriguez handed Keisha her contact information and explained the procedures for secret communication, Marcus stood silently beside them, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Finally, as the FBI agent prepared to leave, Keisha turned to him. Is this why you really came here? She asked. To warn me about the FBI investigation? Marcus nodded. Sophia, Agent Rodriguez. She told me they were going to approach you soon. I thought if I came first, if I explained everything, maybe I could convince you to walk away before you got in too deep. And why would you do that? After everything you did to me, why would you care what happens to me now? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the construction site where workers were installing the water purification system Keisha had designed. Because I finally understand what I threw away, he said. It wasn't just a marriage. It wasn't just a partnership. It was the most brilliant, capable, incredible woman I've ever known, and I was too stupid and selfish to realize it until she was gone. That's not an answer, Keisha said. Yes, it is, Marcus replied. I destroyed us, but I don't want to see you destroyed too. And if you go down with Mitchell, if you end up in federal prison because you trusted the wrong person again, then I'm responsible for that too. Because if I hadn't left you desperate and vulnerable, you never would have accepted his offer in the first place. It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever gotten from him, but it came years too late and under circumstances that made it almost meaningless. After Marcus and Agent Rodriguez left, Keisha stood alone at the construction site, watching workers build what she now knew was an elaborate criminal enterprise disguised as an environmental paradise. Everything she'd poured her heart into for the past 8 months, every innovative design, every sustainable technology, every environmental protection measure, was really just window dressing for a money laundering operation. She thought about Dr. Mitchell's generous offer, his respect for her expertise, his insistence on giving her credit for her work. Had any of it been real, or had it all been manipulation designed to make her compliant and grateful? The worst part was that she couldn't be sure. Maybe Dr. Mitchell genuinely respected her abilities and had simply seen an opportunity to use them for criminal purposes. Maybe he'd started with legitimate intentions and gradually gotten pulled into illegal activities. Or maybe every word he'd spoken to her had been a calculated lie designed to recruit a desperate woman with valuable skills. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that she was trapped again, caught between impossible choices that weren't really choices at all. She could cooperate with the FBI and help them destroy a man who had shown her more professional respect than anyone else in her life, knowing that doing so might put her and Amara in danger from the criminal organizations involved. Or she could refuse to cooperate and face federal criminal charges that would send her to prison and put Amara in foster care. Either way, she was once again at the mercy of forces beyond her control, her fate decided by men who saw her as a tool to be used rather than a person with agency and worth. But as she stood there, watching the sun set over the Caribbean, something shifted in Keisha's perspective. Yes, she was trapped. Yes, her choices were limited. But this time, she understood the game that was being played. This time, she could see all the players and their motivations. Marcus wanted redemption for the damage he'd caused. Agent Rodriguez wanted evidence to build her case. Dr. Mitchell wanted her expertise to legitimize his criminal enterprise. But what did Keisha want? For the first time in years, she had a clear answer. She wanted to survive this with her integrity intact and her daughter safe. Everything else was secondary. That night, after putting Amara to bed, Keisha began planning her strategy. She would cooperate with the FBI, but on her own terms. She would gather the evidence they needed, but she would also protect herself and her daughter. And most importantly, she would make sure that when this was all over, she would finally be free from the men who had tried to use her for their own purposes. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to discover that the web of lies surrounding her was even more complex than she'd imagined, and that sometimes the only way to break free from people who see you as a tool is to become a weapon they never saw coming. 3 days later, Dr. Mitchell returned from a business trip to Colombia, and Keisha began her new role as an FBI informant. The first thing she noticed was that he seemed different, more intense, more secretive, more suspicious of everyone around him. "We need to accelerate the construction timeline," he told her during their first meeting after his return. "I want this resort operational within 6 months, not 12. "That's impossible," Keisha said. "The environmental permits alone will take." "I've handled the permits," Dr. Mitchell interrupted. "What I need from you is a construction schedule that gets us to grand opening by Christmas." Something in his tone made Keisha's skin crawl. This wasn't the respectful, collaborative partner who had rescued her from poverty 8 months ago. This was someone who expected obedience, not partnership. "James," she said carefully, "Russian construction could compromise the environmental protections we built into the design. If we cut corners now, we could cause irreversible damage to the coral reef system." "The coral reefs will be fine," he said dismissively. "What matters is getting this project online and profitable as quickly as possible." It was like watching Marcus all over again, a man who had initially valued her expertise, suddenly treating her like an inconvenient obstacle to his real goals. But now Keisha knew something Dr. Mitchell didn't know she knew. She was gathering evidence of everything he said and did, and the more dismissive he became of her environmental concerns, the more evidence she was gathering of his true priorities. Over the next several weeks, she documented everything. Financial transfers that were labeled as equipment purchases, but corresponded to no actual deliveries. Meetings with local officials who left with briefcases full of cash. Construction schedules that made no sense unless the goal was to hide rather than build infrastructure. Most damning of all, she discovered the real reason Dr. Mitchell wanted to accelerate the timeline. The resort wasn't just a money laundering front. It was also a distribution hub. Once operational, it would serve as a staging ground for drug shipments throughout the Caribbean, with tourists and environmental researchers providing perfect cover for criminal activities. Dr. Mitchell had turned her life's work, sustainable environmental technology, into a tool for some of the world's most dangerous criminals. The revelation should have made her angry, but instead it made her determined. For too long, she allowed other people to take her contributions and use them for purposes she never intended. Marcus had taken her innovations and claimed them as his own vision. Dr. Mitchell had taken her expertise and used it to legitimize criminal enterprise. But this time was going to be different. This time, when the truth came out, Keisha Williams was going to make sure the world knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's employee, but as herself, a brilliant environmental scientist who had been underestimated by everyone who thought they could use her. The confrontation that would change everything was just 2 weeks away. The end came faster than anyone expected, and it started with a phone call that Keisha almost didn't answer. She was reviewing construction plans at her kitchen table, Amara sleeping in her crib nearby, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Given everything that had happened over the past few weeks, unknown numbers made her nervous, but something made her pick up. "Dr. Williams?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "This is Detective Carlos Mendoza with the Belize National Police. I'm calling because we have Dr. James Mitchell in custody, and he's asking to speak with you." The world seemed to tilt sideways. In custody for what? Money laundering, drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 15 other charges that will probably send him to prison for the rest of his life, Detective Mendoza said. The FBI moved up their timeline after they received intelligence that Mitchell was planning to eliminate potential witnesses. Keisha's blood turned to ice. Eliminate witnesses? You were at the top of the list, Dr. Williams, along with 3 other people who had detailed knowledge of his operations. The FBI arrested him and 6 associates early this morning before they could carry out their plan. She sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Dr. Mitchell hadn't just been using her expertise. He'd been planning to kill her to protect his criminal empire. "Dr. Williams?" Detective Mendoza's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you still there?" I'm here, she managed. You said he wants to speak with me? He claims he has information that will clear your name and prove you were an unwitting participant in his operations. But he'll only share it if you agree to visit him. Is that safe? He's in maximum security custody, and the FBI will have agents present during any conversation. But Dr. Williams, you should know, he's not the man you thought he was. The James Mitchell you knew was a complete fabrication. His real name is James Morrison, and he's wanted by law enforcement agencies in 7 countries. After hanging up with Detective Mendoza, Keisha sat in her kitchen trying to process the magnitude of what she'd just learned. The man who had rescued her from poverty, who had given her professional recognition, who had treated her with more respect than her own husband, that man had never existed. James Morrison had created the persona of Dr. James Mitchell specifically to manipulate her into legitimizing his criminal operations. Every kindness, every gesture of respect, every moment of apparent partnership had been calculated to make her compliant and grateful. But the most terrifying realization was that if the FBI had intervened, she would have been murdered within days. Her daughter would have been left orphaned, and the world would have been told that Dr. Keisha Williams had tragically died in an accident while working on her groundbreaking environmental project. That afternoon, despite every instinct telling her to stay as far away from James Morrison as possible, Keisha found herself in a maximum security facility, sitting across from a man who had planned to kill her. He looked different without his expensive suits and confident smile. In an orange jumpsuit, with his hands shackled to the table, James Morrison looked like exactly what he was, a career criminal who had spent his life manipulating people for profit. "Thank you for coming," he said, and his voice still carried traces of the charm that had convinced her to trust him. "I know you have no reason to help me, but I need you to understand something important." "I understand plenty," Keisha said. "I understand that you use me to legitimize your criminal operations. I understand that you plan to have me murdered. What else is there to understand?" "I understand why you'd think that," Morrison said, "but it's not entirely accurate. Yes, I used your expertise to design the resort. Yes, the resort was intended to launder money from criminal organizations. But I never planned to have you killed. Detective Mendoza says you had a hit list with my name on it." Morrison looked genuinely surprised. "That wasn't my list. That was prepared by my Colombian associates without my knowledge or approval. When I found out about it, I tried to call it off, but it was too late. The FBI had already intercepted the communications. So, you're saying you were trying to protect me? I'm saying that despite everything else I've done, I genuinely respected you and your work. The James Mitchell persona wasn't entirely fake. The parts about appreciating your brilliance, about wanting to give you credit for your contributions, those were real." Keisha stared at him, trying to decide if this was just another manipulation or if there was some grain of truth in what he was saying. "Why should I believe anything you tell me?" Morrison leaned forward, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. "Because I'm about to give you information that will destroy any chance I have of reducing my sentence. And I'm doing it because you deserve to know the whole truth about everyone who's been using you." Over the next hour, Morrison told her things that turned her understanding of the past 2 years completely upside down. Marcus hadn't just been laundering money through his resort chain. He'd been actively partnering with criminal organizations for over 5 years. The environmental innovations that Keisha had designed weren't just being used for legitimate purposes. They were being used to hide drug processing facilities and weapon storage areas throughout the Caribbean. "Your ex-husband is a lot more sophisticated than the FBI realizes," Morrison said. "They think he was a small-time player who got in over his head. But Marcus has been running one of the most successful money laundering operations in the region. He's just better at maintaining plausible deniability than I am." "That's impossible," Keisha said. "I would have known. I designed every system in those resorts." "You designed them for legitimate environmental purposes," Morrison agreed. "But Marcus modified them after construction to serve dual purposes. Those water treatment facilities you're so proud of, half of them are actually cocaine processing plants. Those renewable energy systems, they're powering laboratories that manufacture synthetic drugs." The revelation hit Keisha like a physical blow. Not only had Marcus stolen credit for her work, he'd perverted it, turned her life's passion into tools for some of the world's most destructive criminal enterprises. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because the FBI is going to offer Marcus a plea deal," Morrison said. "They're going to let him cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, and part of that cooperation will involve blaming you for designing systems that facilitated criminal activities. But I didn't know. That won't matter if Marcus convinces them you were a willing participant. He's going to claim that you knew exactly what those systems were being used for, that you were a full partner in his criminal operations, and that your apparent innocence is just an act. Keisha felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. Once again, Marcus was planning to sacrifice her to save himself. Once again, she was going to be painted as a criminal while he walked away with minimal consequences. But, Morrison continued, I have evidence that proves you were never a willing participant in any criminal activities. Financial records, recorded conversations, documents that show Marcus deliberately hid the true purpose of the system modifications from you. And you'll share this evidence with the FBI? I'll share it with your attorney, Morrison said, but only if you promise me something. What? Promise me that you won't let them destroy you. Promise me that you won't accept any deal that requires you to plead guilty to crimes you didn't commit. And promise me that when this is all over, you'll use your brilliant mind to build something that actually makes the world better. It was a strange request from a man who had spent his life making the world worse. But Keisha could see something in his eyes that might have been genuine regret. Why does it matter to you what happens to me? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Because in 30 years of criminal activity, you're the only person I've ever met who is exactly what they appear to be. You're brilliant, ethical, and completely committed to making a positive difference in the world. People like you are rare, and the world can't afford to lose them to people like me and Marcus. 3 weeks later, Keisha found herself in a federal courthouse, watching as the lies and manipulation that had defined her life for the past several years were finally exposed to the world. Marcus had indeed tried to negotiate a plea deal that would have implicated her as a willing participant in his criminal operations. But Morrison's evidence made that impossible. Financial records showed that Marcus had deliberately hidden the true purpose of system modifications from his wife. Recorded conversations revealed him discussing ways to keep Keisha unaware of criminal activities. Most damning of all, there were emails between Marcus and his criminal associates specifically discussing the importance of maintaining Keisha's ignorance to preserve the legitimacy of their operations. The prosecution's case was devastating. Marcus Williams had used his wife's environmental expertise to create some of the most sophisticated money laundering and drug processing operations in the Western Hemisphere. He had stolen credit for her innovations while using them for purposes that were the complete opposite of everything she stood for. But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Sophia Rodriguez took the stand to testify about her undercover operation. Mr. Williams believed he was impressing me with his business acumen, she testified. He frequently bragged about how he had manipulated his wife into creating systems he could use for criminal purposes. He specifically told me that she was too naive and idealistic to ever suspect what he was really doing with her designs. Did he express any remorse for deceiving his wife? The prosecutor asked. On the contrary, Agent Rodriguez replied. He seemed to take pride in his ability to use her expertise without her knowledge. He said that leaving her for a younger woman was the best decision he'd ever made because it freed him to pursue more profitable ventures without having to worry about her ethical objections. Do you think she was right to choose rebuilding over revenge? Let us know in the comments. Keisha sat in the courthouse gallery, listening to testimony that revealed the complete scope of Marcus's betrayal. It wasn't just that he'd left her for another woman. It wasn't just that he'd stolen credit for her work. He had spent years deliberately preventing her life's passion, turning her environmental innovations into tools for drug dealers and money launderers, all while convincing her that she was making the world a better place. The sentencing phase provided some satisfaction. Marcus received 25 years in federal prison for money laundering, drug trafficking, and racketeering. Morrison received life without parole for the same charges plus conspiracy to commit murder. Several of their associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. But more satisfying than their punishments was what happened next. The federal government, as part of the asset forfeiture proceedings, recognized that Keisha was a rightful creator of the environmental technologies that had been perverted for criminal use. Not only did they clear her of any wrongdoing, but they awarded her complete ownership of all patents and innovations that had been registered under Marcus's name. Overnight, Dr. Keisha Williams went from being a victim of criminal manipulation to being the sole owner of some of the most advanced sustainable resort technologies in the world. The vindication felt incredible, but it also felt incomplete. She had her reputation back. She had financial security, and she had legal recognition of her contributions. But she still felt like she was defined by what had been done to her rather than what she had chosen to do. That's when she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of licensing her technologies to other developers, instead of going to work for an established resort chain, instead of taking the safe path that would guarantee financial security, Keisha decided to build something of her own. 6 months after the trials ended, she broke ground on Nia Bay Resort in Costa Rica, a completely sustainable, carbon-negative resort that would serve as a model for environmental responsibility in the tourism industry. But Nia Bay wasn't just about environmental innovation. It was about creating something that could never be perverted, never be stolen, never be used for purposes other than what she intended. Every system was designed with transparency in mind. Every financial transaction was public record. Every environmental impact was monitored and reported by independent organizations. More importantly, Nia Bay was designed to empower local communities rather than exploit them. Keisha hired local workers and paid them living wages. She partnered with local environmental groups and indigenous communities to ensure the resort actually benefited the ecosystem rather than just minimizing damage. She created educational programs that would train the next generation of environmental scientists and sustainable tourism professionals. The project attracted international attention from the moment construction began. Environmental organizations praised the innovative technologies. Tourism industry publications featured Keisha on their covers. Academic institutions invited her to speak about sustainable development and ethical business practices. For the first time in her life, Keisha Williams was getting credit for her own work, on her own terms, for her own purposes. But the most satisfying moment came 18 months after Nia Bay opened, when Keisha received a letter from a young environmental science student at Howard University, the same school where she'd met Marcus 30 years earlier. Dear Dr. Williams, the letter began, I'm writing my thesis on sustainable tourism development, and your work at Nia Bay has completely changed how I think about the relationship between environmental protection and economic development. But more than that, your story has shown me that it's possible to maintain your ethical principles even when everyone around you seems to be compromising theirs. You've inspired me to pursue my own path in environmental science, and I wanted you to know that there are young people out there who see you as proof that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, can ultimately lead to success. The letter was signed by Amanda Chun, and attached was a photo of a young woman who looked remarkably like Keisha had looked at that age, determined, idealistic, and ready to change the world. As Keisha sat in her office overlooking Nia Bay's pristine coastline, watching her daughter Amara play on the beach with the children of resort employees, she realized something that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. She was happy. Not the desperate gratitude she'd felt when Dr. Mitchell offered her a way out of poverty. Not the cautious relief she'd felt when the FBI cleared her of criminal charges. But genuine, deep, sustainable happiness that came from building something meaningful with her own hands, for her own purposes, according to her own values. Marcus had taken 23 years of her life and perverted her life's work for criminal purposes. Morrison had manipulated her desperation and nearly gotten her killed. The FBI had used her as an informant to build their case. But in the end, all of their attempts to use her had failed. She had survived their manipulation, exposed their crimes, and built something better from the wreckage they'd left behind. The ultimate revenge, Keisha had learned, wasn't destroying the people who had wronged her. It was proving that their attempts to break her had only made her stronger, more determined, and more committed to the values they had tried to corrupt. Today, Nia Bay Resort is considered one of the most successful sustainable tourism projects in the world. It has inspired dozens of similar developments throughout Central and South America. Dr. Keisha Williams is regularly invited to speak at international conferences about environmental innovation and ethical business practices. But more importantly, she has created a legacy that can never be stolen, perverted, or used for purposes other than what she intended. When Amara is old enough to understand, she'll inherit not just a successful business, but a model for how to maintain your integrity, even when the world tries to convince you to compromise your values. And sometimes late at night when the resort is quiet and the only sound is waves lapping against the shore, Keisha thinks about the woman she was 3 years ago, desperate, abandoned, convinced that her best days were behind her. That woman could never have imagined that her lowest moment would ultimately lead to her greatest triumph, that the betrayals and manipulations that seemed to destroy everything she built would actually clear the way for her to build something better, that sometimes the people who try to use you end up giving you exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. Resilience, Keisha had learned, isn't about surviving what people do to you. It's about transforming their attempts to break you into the foundation for something they could never have imagined. And that transformation, from victim to victor, from tool to architect, from someone else's supporting character to hero of her own story, is the most powerful revenge of all. We spend countless hours uncovering and shaping these real-life stories for you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider it. It helps us keep going. And remember, the stories too deep for YouTube are waiting for you once you subscribe.